welcome to another episode of my vlog. Now for this month's video, I took inspiration from my online chess adventures. Now adventures is really the operative word because now that everything has moved onto the online chess scene, well, that has brought along with it a whole host of other issues. Things like flagging, dirty, nasty, cheapos. You know, the type you're a queen up and then before you know it, you've stalemated your opponent. The panic when your clock starts ticking down. Well, maybe it's just me, but I thought, you know what? I want to do something about this. I want to deal with these issues. And I discovered that there are 4 things that you can do that will really help your online chess. Now, my very first tip, and I'm actually not sure it's going to be a popular tip because quite frankly it involves a lot of hard work, and I know some players out there are lazy and don't want to do that, but for this one there is guaranteed improvement, and this is calculation. There's no ifs, there's no buts. The secret to playing good online chess, and actually, to be honest, good over the board chess, is also in fast and good calculation. You want to get your calculation up to mega levels, and by mega levels it means basically that it's become such an automatic process for you to check the checks, the captures, the attacks, and in middle games, pawn breaks, that your brain is automatically doing it and you don't have to put any significant effort. I've collected into a folder some of the books I have specifically on calculation. I've also included studies. Why, you might ask? And that's because they are a fantastic way of honing calculation and imagination skills. And the more patterns you accumulate, the better it gets. Of these books, I really wanted to mention one of my favorite chapters. It's from Chess Calculation Training by Roman Edouard, and it's chapter 9. So here I'm going to click on the study button and the exercise comes up. Now, I love this chapter because it's based on real life opportunities. Now, this is the kind of position you could easily get in a blitz game, and you have to take a split-second decision. Are you going to capture the pawn on c6 with check? Who doesn't want to win a pawn with check? And or are you going to take some time out and work everything out? So I'm going to give you a chance to pause and see whether it is in fact possible to capture on c6. And then last chance, and then we'll continue. Okay, so I hope you guys are using my formula of checks, captures and attacks, because once you start training on that, it becomes very easy. So for instance, queen takes c6, and we can see that black has 3 responses: queen d7, knight d7, king e7. There's only really one serious response. The king on e7 is just too out there for my liking, and queen d7 just drops a rook. So the natural answer is knight d7. And then pawn takes bishop. So far, so good. And here we go through the options again. So checks, well, no checks, I'm afraid, because the bishop on c1 is doing a very good job of covering the g5 square, and any attacks. And we can see that the queen can't attack anything because the rook on a8 is hanging. And so that leaves only one attack, which is the rook coming to c8, or we have the capture, which is pawn takes pawn. Between those 2 moves, which one is most natural? And I would say definitely rook c8, because rook c8 brings the rook into the game and at the same time attacks the queen. And in your calculations, you actually don't need to put your queen, the white queen, on a specific square. You can have her hanging in some limbo. You know, she can be on b5 or a4 or a6. It doesn't quite matter, because then you can kind of switch to a technical comparison. And here we run through the same thing again. You say any checks. No, unfortunately, that bishop on c1 is covering the checks. And then we have any captures, and we have pawn takes pawn, or we have rook takes bishop. Any attacks? Well, we've got some attacks. Queen goes to f6 or queen goes to h4. And looking at those lists, we run through them and we go, well, it's very attractive to go rook takes bishop, because if this works, then we are going to be material up. So rook takes bishop, and we calculate rook takes rook. Any checks, any captures, any attacks, and lo and behold, we can see that the check we have been wanting to play for many moves now is possible. We can play queen g5 check, and the king moves, queen takes rook. And it's very important not to stop here, actually, because you have to see that this queen on c1 is actually covering the safety of her king, because it would be a bit of a disaster if the queen on c1 didn't help out the king. So for instance, the white queen could magically put herself on c8, and then we have a bit of a mess. So this is how you train repeatedly on a calculation. Start with 3 or 4 exercises per day. It is okay to go for a difficult book and not solve a single one. The point is you just have to keep going. So my second tip, it's something that you're probably gonna listen to me and probably go, well, duh. But I can tell you, when panic starts setting in, this little thing, well, it just slips away and you forget about things and you just think, oh my God, I just need to make a move. Well, the tip is use all your pieces. Have as your default a developing move or a move that brings the right piece into play. Now I'm going to show you this, or how this could have been done in my game. It's actually a very painful loss, and I'm not really sure whether I should be putting it out there for everyone to see, but I will. And the second one is from the world champion himself. I'm going to take a quick look at my game against Chess Queen, otherwise known as Alexandra Kosteniuk, and we played in the Abu Dhabi Super Blitz Challenge on chess.com. It's a very, very strong online blitz event. And as you can see from the position, I am a piece up. And you might very well be asking me, well, why are you showing me this completely won game? Isn't it the case that anything will win? Well, yes, there is some truth to that statement. I'm not going to hide that. This is, after all, something I'm not particularly proud about, but it's an instructive mistake. So it's white to play, and white plays bishop e3 with the idea of playing bishop c5. So the first question you have to ask yourself is bishop c5 a threat? Is it actually doing anything besides being an active chess move? And we'll can quickly see that if I make a move like h5, which is a nice improving move, that bishop h5, bishop c5, we can retreat the queen to c7, and no harm has been done. Let's go back to the position. So bishop c5 is a kind of like, well, so what? You mustn't be afraid of your opponent's active move. Remember, I am a piece up. And the next question is, well, if it is something that you do really want to stop and you kind of want to improve your pieces, well, then a move like knight a4 comes into consideration, with the idea of putting pressure on the weak c3 pawn, certainly, and also stopping bishop c5. And this was a big indicator of panic, reacted to bishop e3 with knight d7. So my knight, which was on b6 and was threatening to go on the outpost to a4, is now somewhere on the 7th rank doing, I don't know, not that much. So not a great move from me. White plays c4. There's a kind of maxim, you go backwards, I go forwards, and Alexandra's like, okay, right, I'm going to increase the tension. And so now the question is, do I take or not to take? And using this idea of using all your pieces, we can actually turn that concept on its head, because if we want to improve all our pieces, we most certainly do not want to improve our opponent's pieces. So let's just do a quick comparison. So far, this bishop on f1, kind of sucks, doesn't it? You know, it's looking at a d3 pawn, and also the c4 pawn is in its way. But if I take, well, let's have a look at that scope. Oh, suddenly the bishop gets two more, you know, an extra square, and then it has an even bigger range when that pawn, which I can't stop from moving, will go to c5. Yeah, not a good choice. Instead, use this idea, have as a default an improving move, and we can actually see that after c4, one of the consequences of that is, yes, she might get a protected passed pawn with c4, c5, but she has abandoned control over the d4 square. Now, using my pieces, I can see that there's one piece that's dying to be played, and it's like, yes, put my knight on c6 so I can hop in to d4. And the funny thing is, I think I was lulled into a false sense of security, because after c4 I was just looking at ways to simplify. You know, that's the rule. When you're in trouble, you complicate. When you're up material, you simplify. And I was just simply looking at ways that I could just reduce the tension, but I didn't use this very, very powerful idea of bringing all my pieces into play, you know, and I would have been an easy game. So my second example comes from world champion Magnus Carlsen himself. Here he is playing white as a Dr. Nichtestein, and his opponent is Sergei Shikako, a very strong grandmaster, actually renowned for his blitz. And this is actually a bullet game, which means each player had 1 minute apiece, which does make for fast and furious, frantic chess. Maybe not 100% accurate according to the computer. Before I reveal all, I would like you to have a guess at how Magnus continued in this position. And I really want you to think of having a developing move as your default. So have pause and last chance, and I'll continue. Okay, so in this position, bear in mind that black has some potential ideas of b5, b4, maybe at a long shot rook takes c3 in certain situations. Magnus decides to simply increase the scope of one piece that isn't working. And who are the guys that are not working? Well, it's certainly not the bishop on d4, who's doing an amazing job. It's these guys on a1 and g1. And the first one that can be improved, well, that would be the rook on g1. And it moves to g3, and look at the scope. Look at how many squares it has now. It also has the advantage of overprotecting this tactical weak spot on c3 and supporting the pawn on e4. It can get behind, okay, rook e3, and then perhaps some potential e4, e5, although I'd be very careful about doing that. And black continued with e6. I hope you noticed in your pause that b4 isn't actually possible because of the move knight d5. Knight d5 is very strong because after bishop takes knight, we have Zwischenzug. A takes b4. You know, the rook is now defended by the bishop, and queen c7, e takes d5, queen takes c2, and this is just a very bad endgame for black. You know, only one of his pieces is working, and that's the rook. And look at white. White's got passed pawns. Rooks that are just powerful, and a supreme bishop. Oh, it is curtains. Black, unsurprisingly, didn't choose b4, but instead played e6. Try again to try to maximize his pieces that aren't working. The bishop on f8 and the rook on h8. Magnus continues with h4. Again, provoking b4 because it doesn't work because of knight e2. Bishop takes e4. Once again, it's a bit of a killer Zwischenzug, and queen c7 doesn't work because now it's the rook on g3 who plays the hero with rook c3. After h4, black continued with rook g8, and white overprotects the e4 pawn and plays rook e3. So now b4 is just never going to be in the equation because of this pin. And we have bishop e7. And once again, I'd like you to have a pause and think about how you'd like to continue. Which piece is not working and how can you bring them into the game? So last chance, and then I'll continue. And yep, you guessed it. It is the rook on a1 that is not pulling its weight. We'll be honest, it's not only doing that, but the king on e1 also doesn't have a safe place to call home. So this is why Magnus played the very interesting a4. Now this move is actually inaccuracy according to the computer. And it's an accuracy in a kind of very, very similar way to the mistake that I made against Alexander Kosteniuk. Black should keep the tension and play bishop c6. And after all, a takes b4 is just not, a takes b5, sorry, it's just not an issue. And maintaining tension, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But black didn't respond well, and instead of playing bishop c6, played b4, and suddenly the tension has disappeared in the position. And this means white can castle in good conscience, and now every single piece will be involved in a potential attack. Magnus played knight e2, and now the real mistake comes with d5. Magnus plays e5. Again, not the computer's first choice. The first choice would be e takes d5, but he just takes a very human approach of seizing the space, and king d7, but all is not safe, and because of f5. And once again, their attacks and the tactics are just working in white's favor. E takes f5. It really fails to castle queenside, and knight f4 followed by e6 is coming, and it's deadly. So we can look back to the position. I'm just going to play one more move. So after rook c7, you know, black is just really struggling. f6, bishop d8, rook takes g7, and you know, you would perhaps guess that rook f3 was played, but no, Magnus simply continues with his philosophy. The rook on a1 needs to be involved in the game, and it's going to be involved like this. So now you have this idea of rook f3 followed by rook f1, doubling power on the f line. And after a move like bishop c6, Magnus decides to play it safe by playing king b1, although he doesn't actually need to. And the point is that after bishop takes a4, there is no threat. You can take the bishop in good conscience. And this position is just killing. My third tip, be resourceful. How is one resourceful? Probably with some grit and a healthy dose of optimism, aside from learning your stalemating patterns. But I am actually going to refer to the guru himself, the Grandmaster David Smerdon. He's famous for his swindles, but not only that, he's just written a book called The Complete Chess Swindler, where he breaks down the subject into a fine art. So before we dive into the most marvelous piece of swindling I have seen in a long time, I just wanted to reference the 4 psychological flaws that David Smerdon says every swindler should be able to take advantage of. The first being impatience. You know, you got places to go, things to see. Why are you still making me play chess and it's completely one position? Yeah, we've all felt like that. Well, if your opponent is like that, chances are if you offer them a fraudulent shortcut to victory, you might save the point. And then we have something called hubris, which is basically when your opponent is smug and overconfident, thinks he's got it in the bag, and makes them vulnerable to tricks. And then we have something called fear, you know, the fear of the complicated, of letting the wind slip. Well, if your opponent is playing in that manner, go berserk. Attack them like crazy. Throw the kitchen sink at them. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. That will shake them up a bit. And then we have something that David Smerdon calls control zwang. It sounds very impressive, but it's actually the desire to keep control. And here he quotes David Bronstein, which says, "A game of chess is not an examination of knowledge, it is a battle of nerves. I like that quote. But returning to the diagram, it's the following position. It's black to play. And when coping with positions like this, you can see that black is fundamentally lost. But David Smerdon has come up with a theory of infinite resistance, which is basically 3 questions you should ask yourself to help perhaps guide you into setting up a trap. The first question is, what does my opponent want? Second question, how do they plan to achieve it? Third, what is good about my position? It's good to have that optimism at the end. And give you a chance to pause and see whether you can come up with an idea. So, last chance to pause, and then I continue. So you can actually see that the white's plan is supremely simple and supremely deadly. First of all, you have f6. Well, not f6, sorry. The plan is, let's go back. I got sidetracked. Rook e7. So if I make a move like rook f6, rook e7, king f8, queen a7, well, that's going to be curtains. Because after rook d1 check, king f2, rook f1, king g3, and you can see that the king is going nowhere. So after rook g8 check, I'm going to ignore the fact that I can play rook g7, but instead king h3, and white is safe. Queen c7 is going to be checkmate, and it's all over. And all because the white king could escape. Let's return to the position. So how can I deal with rook e7? Well, you can play rook he8, and after rook takes f5, you can see that the f7 pawn is very vulnerable, as is the h6. But it does deal with the immediate threat of rook e7 being very deadly. Returning to the original position, you might have thought and said, yes, I have it, rook g8. And then here we come to another point of swindling. It has to be subtle. If you play rook g8, chances are your opponent goes, yeah, I know what you want. You want after rook e7 check, king c8. You want me to play queen a7 because the rook, when it comes to deliver check on f1, well, that's going to be checkmate. That's not very subtle. If you want to have another go at solving it and trying to find the most subtle way to win the game, stop the computer now. Stop and pause now. Otherwise, I'm going to continue. David, in fact, played the most fiendish move on the board, and it actually took me by surprise. I did not see it one bit, and this is why I'm showing it to you now, because I just think it's wonderful. h5, like, come on, h5, what kind of move is that? And white duly played rook e7, king c8, queen a7, and white's rubbing the hands in glee. You know, what does black have planned? And after rook d1 check, king f2, rook f1, king g3. And now this is the point. You play h4 check, king goes to h3. And if you remember what's good about the position, you might have hit upon the, I have the light squares, and there you have rook f3, g takes f3, bishop f1, and it's checkmate. Marvelous piece of swindling, and it's a fantastic book. I actually read 9 chapters straight. What can I say? It's highly recommended, and read it and start saving those points. Now, my fourth and final tip, well, this one is pretty straightforward actually. It's know your openings, know the plans, know where your pieces should go, and know of any pitfalls. If you do this, you can play the opening stage at tempo, which will save you a lot of time that you can use later on in the game. And I'm actually going to show you a game that I won relatively quickly and easily against a stronger opponent. I'm going to show you another one of my games from the Abu Dhabi Super Blitz Challenge. And this time I was playing white against someone who was higher rated than me. And he just played queen b6, and I responded with the correct move, knight a3. Why do I say that's the correct move? Well, I have in the past, when I didn't put in the work, have played moves like Queen C1, which, to be honest, a little bit tame. Doesn't really do anything. Doesn't really get an advantage either. But Knight A3 actually is a quite tricky move, because the big point is that Queen takes B2 is actually not possible because of Knight B5, and after Knight A6, or the much more active move and tempting Knight D5, White will simply play Rook B1, Queen takes A2, Rook A1, Queen B2, and now this is the key point, Bishop C4, and the Queen is trapped. So taking the pawn is like forbidden. Let's go back. After Knight A3, my opponent played D5, which is a little bit different to my game against David Navarro, who responded with C takes D4. But okay, not to be phased, I knew what was going to come next, and that is just to put the knight on b5. You want this knight on b8 to be misplaced, because the kind of reasoning is that yes, the knight might be on b5, but if the knight is forced to go to a6 and this rook is forced to stay on a8, one knight is tying down two pieces. That's kind of the logic. So knight a6 forced, and I play a4 in order to secure that knight. Now my opponent immediately goes wrong. He plays strategical mistake c4. Now if you're kind of playing guess the move, you should really stop now and try and guess what white should be doing. Because here it is a kind of a very standard plan that when black reacts in this move, basically you are going to be playing for two moves. So pause and try and figure it out, as I'm going to continue. So as you can probably guess, when you've extended this pawn like this, I'm looking to lengthen the bishop, the diagonal of the bishop, so I want to play b3. Somehow or other, that undermining break is going to come. So I played c3 to prepare it, and after bishop d7, b3. And it's quite funny here how black immediately gets like a bad position, because he wants to get greedy with bishop takes knight, a takes, and after queen takes, we have b takes c4, d takes c4, and knight e5. And the point is that rook c8, you can even capture on c4 and pin the queen. You can actually capture with bishop takes c4, rook takes, and then queen e2, or you can do it with the knights. Both are promising. That doesn't really help. So my opponent goes wrong again with c takes b3, opening up the position. And you remember, now my queen is on d1, now it's on b3. My scope of activity has increased. And after bishop e7, I quickly, surprisingly, the game just turned because I have the concrete move a5, and my opponent made things worse by playing queen c6. Queen d8 is kind of forced, but it looks bad. You have to kind of either go bishop takes knight or king f8, and no, the king f8 loses to knight takes b7, so not good. So queen c6 played, but okay, this invites knight e5, queen c8, and the point is that after knight takes d7, you would love to play queen takes d7, but unfortunately that doesn't work because of knight d6 check. And tactics favor me, you know, it was like some higher level, because you can just see bishop takes, bishop b5 wins the game. And just to show you quickly the ending, after knight takes d7, knight d6 check, bishop takes, he cannot castle, his king is in danger. I just need to involve my bishop and my rook into the game, and it will be curtains. Knight c7, bishop d3, c4, and yeah, he's just opening up the position for me. He's doing my job. Queen takes, and it looks like queen c2 might get somewhere, but no, I just castle. And I try to use this idea of using all my pieces, knight f8, rook, and rook c7, and that's it. My opponent resigned. So I can firmly say that I won this game just because I knew what I should be doing, and my opponent just went wrong, and that was quite a nice and easy victory. I hope you've enjoyed this little video and picked up a few useful tips and tricks to help you on your online chess adventures. Until the next, stay safe.